The following presentation was prepared for the conference Archaeology in Conflict, which took place April 6th through April 10th, 2010 at the Vienna International Center, Vienna, Austria. My name is Eric Nemeth, and I pursue research on the interrelation of cultural property and international security. In the following presentation, I introduce the concept of collecting intelligence as a means for anticipating and mitigating the tactical exploitation of cultural property by non-state actors. The tightening interrelation of cultural property and international security creates a need for the collection and analysis of specialized intelligence. Cultural intelligence enables assessments of the tactical and strategic significance of antiquities, fine art, and sites of cultural heritage. Today, I will present a framework for the collection of cultural intelligence as fundamental to countering threats to cultural security. The exploitation of cultural patrimony in conflict motivates the collection of intelligence on religious monuments, archaeological sites, and antiquities collections. Non-state actors exploit the significance of cultural patrimony to tactical and strategic advantage. Targets of individual acts of political violence, such as the demolition of the Bamiyan Buddhas, contribute to broader campaigns of cultural cleansing. Collateral damage of so-called cultural shields, for example, destruction of weapons caches in mosques, leads to post-conflict political backlash against intervening nations. Looting of antiquities, such as after military intervention in Afghanistan and Iraq, potentially creates a source of funding for insurgencies. And in post-conflict, trafficking in antiquities erodes cultural identity, negatively affects public relations for intervening nations, and creates risks of future cases for repatriation against market nations. Cultural intelligence creates a basis for countering the exploitation. Intelligence on the cultural significance of monuments, the locations of collections and historic structures, the financial and political clout of antiquities, and the networks that traffic in antiquities, has the potential to mitigate the tactical and strategic value exploited by non-state actors in conflict. Cultural intelligence enables tactics or hard power, such as strategic bombing that minimizes collateral damage of cultural patrimony, planning for security of public collections during armed conflict, assessments for post-conflict risks of looting of archaeological sites, and enforcement of laws against trafficking. Cultural intelligence also enables pre-conflict strategic development of soft power, such as initiatives for complying with international conventions, planning conservation for the benefit of cultural identity, proactive repatriation and negotiation for stewardship of antiquities, and raising awareness of due diligence in collecting practices. Collection of intelligence at each level has relevance to cultural security. As examples, I will focus on intelligence sources for the market value of artworks and for networks that traffic in antiquities and primitive art. The clandestine nature of the art world poses challenges similar to those faced by intelligence services that collect information on foreign nations. As with foreign intelligence, open source material provides a large portion of the raw data, and human assets enable access to information that is not publicly available. In the art world, open source material includes news media that covers the art market, scholarly literature in art history and archaeology, and archives for auctions of fine art and antiquities. News media have demonstrated the potential to predict risks of exploitation of cultural patrimony. Prior to World War II, Alfred Barr reported on the Nazi movement to control fine art that developed into the plunder of Jewish collections and destruction and looting of cultural property in conquered nations. In the 1960s, reports of looting in developing nations predated the realization of the potential ramifications for collectors in market nations. In 1998, news coverage of Taliban threats to destroy the Bamiyan Buddhas predicted the eventual demolition in 2001. Scholarly literature may be exploited for either protection or plunder of cultural property in conflict. Nazi and Soviet art historians referenced catalogs of foreign collections to plan plunder of conquered territories. During the Cold War era, archaeologists published on the movement of antiquities from source nations to market nations. In the post-Cold War period, documentation on museum collections has aided efforts for recovery of looted objects. Auction archives provide a basis to assess the market value of particular types of art and to compare value across different types of art. Analysis of the relative value of different types of art has the potential to assess relative risk of looting across source nations. As a necessary complement in intelligence collection, human assets can provide information that is not accessible through open source material. Historically, governments have leveraged actors in the art world in pursuit of intelligence. During World War II, intelligence services of the Allied forces interrogated German dealers who had formed the networks that traded art for Nazi officials. During the Cold War, intelligence agencies actively recruited archaeologists and anthropologists who conducted fieldwork in foreign nations of political interest. In the post-Cold War period, initiatives such as the FBI Art Crime Team suggest an awareness of the evolving political clout of cultural patrimony. Following the model of World War II and the Cold War, governments could engage dealers and collectors to glean insights into the clandestine art market for protection of cultural patrimony in conflict and into associated security risks. To illustrate open source material and human assets, I will present examples of auction archives and dealers of African tribal art. The wealth of data in auction archives provide a basis for comparing market interest and value across different types of art. This example shows sales data collected from the website of an international auction house. Based on sales of types of artwork as specified by the auction house over the past 9 years, sales of African tribal art demonstrated the most consistent increase relative to ethnic artifacts originating from other geographic regions, that is, Greek, Roman, Egyptian antiquities, pre-Columbian art, Indian and Southeast Asian art, and Islamic art. While declining in the past 2 years, the sales of African tribal art showed the greatest increase in comparison with the other types of art over the 9-year period. The distinction warrants more detailed inspection. When sales are analyzed by average price and trade volume, the rising trend remains. The size of the spheres represent the relative number of objects sold in a particular year. The red spheres indicate a steadily increasing market value of African tribal art. The trend motivates a more detailed analysis of the sales of African tribal art. A comparison of sales across regions within the continent shows varying degrees of increase through 2008, but only the sales for objects from the Sahel as a region increased in 2009. Sales of objects originating from other regions followed the economic downturn of 2009. The contrast warrants closer inspection of sales of objects originating from the Sahel. Objects originating from Mali, Nigeria, Burkina Faso accounted for the majority of sales over the past 9 years. But only sales of objects originally from Mali increased in 2009. The potential to analyze the relative market value of African tribal art and to define a focus within the continent provides a perspective on assessing risks of looting in developing nations. Collection and analysis of auction archive data enables a global view of the art market and enables progressively more detailed assessments of the relative market value of artworks according to source nation. Such analyses contribute to assessments of relative risks of looting and thereby can inform decisions on focusing the development of human assets. Nations of the Sahel form the southern border of the Sahara, with Mauritania in the west and Ethiopia in the east. The analyses of auction archive data identified the market value of Malian tribal art as having particular significance, which motivates further investigation of the movement of artworks from the nation. The auction archive also contains cultural information and provenance about the artworks. The archive classified the majority of the artworks as originating from the tribes Bamana, Dogon, and Senufo, and the artworks were held primarily in collections in Europe and the United States, which were concentrated in particular cities. So information from the archive contributes to an understanding of the movement of artworks after leaving Mali and identifies collectors who could serve as information sources on trafficking. The movement of tribal artworks to market nation contrasts with the transfer of artworks from regions of Islamic influence. Studies in the northeastern area of the Niger River Basin indicate that material of looted artworks of Islamic influence is trafficked to neighboring nations, integrated into artworks, and marketed abroad. The information in the auction archive identifies collectors as human assets who can provide information on artworks that were removed from the source nation several decades past, whereas dealers represent assets who might have information on artworks that are being looted and trafficked from Mali in the present. Dealers hold information on artworks that have been trafficked to market nations and on looting of objects in source nations. The archive identifies dealers who operate in European cities, and reportedly dealers themselves have recruited students to travel to source nations. In providing the dealers with artworks, the students pass along first-hand information about looting. Malian and foreign dealers within the nation also have first-hand information about looting and advise tourists on how to navigate export restrictions through porous borders of neighboring nations. Dealers can provide information on trafficking routes, such as through bordering nations that have less vested interest in Malian artworks, by ground shipment through northern Africa via Morocco, and by flights to Europe, such as reportedly from Bamako to France. Data from the auction archives identifies collectors and dealers as assets for information on looting and tracking of looted artworks. The collected intelligence may also aid in countering broader security considerations of coincident threats. Examples in Mali include drug trafficking through remote eastern Mali, kidnapping of tourists, and human trafficking. A more detailed examination reveals the value of cultural intelligence to cultural security and international security. Security threats in Mali include movement of al-Qaeda and the Islamic Maghreb into the Sahel, conflict between governmental groups and rebel Tuareg, and organized crime that traffic in drugs, humans, and potentially tribal art through Mali. Dealers who hold information on tribal art may be able to inform on trafficking in artworks from Mali, and may therefore also have insights into trafficking networks for drugs and humans. To the extent that trafficking intersects with the agendas of terrorist groups and rebel groups, dealers may also serve as a source of information to counter threats of conflict with non-state actors. Information from auction archives provides sales data that quantifies the risk of looting, and provenance data that tracks the movement of objects in the art world. Such insights enable local governments to make informed decisions on claims for repatriation and to negotiate with foreign governments on the movement of cultural patrimony. In summary, the motivation for collecting intelligence on trafficking that precipitates from conflict stems not only from the goal of protecting cultural patrimony, but also from the objective of countering related, broader security threats. During conflict, trafficking may provide funding to terrorist groups and thereby enable collaboration with transnational organized crime. In post-conflict, looting damages public relations with the intervening nation and erodes the cultural identity of the local society. Open sources, such as auction archives, and human assets, such as collectors and dealers, present opportunities for cultural intelligence. Collection and analysis of open source material identifies risks in developing nations and defines a focus of development of human assets. Dealers may identify security threats by providing information on trafficking networks. In combination, open source collection and human assets provide data for risk assessments. The resulting cultural intelligence mitigates the risks of looting and fosters public relations. By contributing to the disruption of trafficking and the preservation of cultural identity, cultural intelligence becomes a source of both hard power in countering collaboration between organized crime and terrorist groups, and soft power in garnering political goodwill in regions of conflict.